Get the state of,
We're on,
the state
Rich.
of our presidency.
Rich.
But it had to make me laugh that he just cut the
This meeting of the Margate City
big deal about.
Planning Board is called to order. Please stand for the flag salute. Attention, salute.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Tom Collins. Here. Clem Wozleski. Here. Mike Richmond. Jim Galantino.
Here.
Margaret Gubernalty. Here. Mike Cristaldi.
Here.
Craig Palmisano.
Here.
David Carter.
Here.
Despina Hess.
Can I see your book?
Remy Pelosi. Joe DiGirolamo.
Here.
Rich Patterson.
Here. This meeting is being held in accordance with due public notice thereof and pursuant to the New Jersey State Sunshine Law. Notice of this meeting was advertised in the press, and a copy of same has been posted on the bulletin board in the municipal building. All applicants are hereby advised that should you receive board approval tonight, you must come forward and sign a form which informs you regarding the timing of receiving building permits and mercantile licenses. At the end of your case tonight, please see the board administrator to sign the two information sheets. Let the record show Despina Hess just got here. I'd like to hear a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
I'll make the motion.
We're not approving minutes on here.
Oh, okay, sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, we are going to hear from Stuart Weiser from Remington, Vernick, and Wahlberg to introduce the changes to the master plan. Mr. Weiser?
Good evening, board members. It's been a long road. Before I get started, I'd like to introduce members of our team. We have Ryan McGowan from Remington, Vernick, from our offices, who did the lion's share of the document that you have before you this evening. We have Mark Petrella from Sosh Architects, who is the architectural component to our team. We have Joe Weinert from Spectrum Gaming, who did a lot of the Spectrum Gaming, and Michael Pollack did a lot of the interviews that we will talk about in terms of the SWOT analysis for the master plan. And we have Daniel Miles from eConsult Solutions, who helped us with the who did the economic development piece and the sustainability plan element.
Let the record show that Mike Richmond is here.
Just in terms of a little background, in July of 2015, the City of Margate issued an RFP for planning services to undertake a master plan update to include the various master plan elements that you see in the box on the cover of the master plan document. Ryan, if you could go back to the cover.
Let the record show that Remy Pelosi is here.
So the first three elements that you see up there, the statement of objectives, principles, assumptions, policies, and standards, the land use plan element, and the housing plan element, those are mandatory components of a master plan under the municipal land use law. The remaining elements are optional under the municipal land use law. And there are also a couple of other optional elements that just simply didn't apply to Margate, so they were things that the city didn't request as part of their RFP. The project was funded through 4 separate grants from the Department of Community Affairs, and we submitted a proposal in August of 2015. We began our work roughly in December of 2015. Now, typically, an effort such as this, especially one with as many master plan elements as was requested, could take about 3 years. The requirements of the grant required us to complete it in 1 year. So this requirement made us fast-track the process, and as a result, and I'll say this quite frankly, we didn't have time to polish the document that you have before you this evening. It is quite raw. It is full of a number of errors. Clem You are indeed a member of the planning board, despite what page 2 says. Roger, you are Roger McLarnon, not Roger Rubin. And there are other errors throughout the document. We will say that while we are very proud, the team is very proud of the contents of the document and what the planning work that is submitted there, we can't say as much for the quality of the document itself. We recognize this. We apologize to you because this is not the type of document that we believe you're used to receiving. It's not the type of document that we would normally wish to submit. We were constrained by the state. Having said that, how are we going to cure it? What we're going to do is, as we go through tonight, we'll hear your reactions. You will have, we know that there are a number of changes that have to be made, not substantive changes, but formatting, typographical. We went through some issues with the chairman. We went through some comments with Roger. I know the chairman has gotten some comments from some of you other board members. Those will be addressed tonight verbally. They will be then addressed as part of the final polish of the document. And what we propose to do is, assuming we get approval tonight, have sit down with the chairman. We'll make the changes. He'll approve the changes as to be totally consistent with the conversation that we had tonight and the feeling of the planning board. To the extent that there's anything that might be different than that, that would come back. But Stan, we would hope that we would be able to make these, what are mostly Scribner's errors, and the insertion of maps where they need to be and the formatting of the document without having to come back to the board.
I mean, I would say that's okay. Whatever changes we're going to make, we're going to just put on the record, and then when we approve it, it will be with those changes made.
Exactly.
So then, and after the fact, they'll actually be written and changed or modified. Is that what?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah,
so
that would be my recommendation to the board to do that tonight. Yes. Because of the constraints.
That's our feeling. So, also, as you can see, just from the size of the document and the number of master plan elements that are included in it, there's a lot of stuff here. If we were to present all of this stuff here to you tonight, we'd be here forever, and you would pretty much shoot all of us. So what we propose to do is, while we will be prepared to answer questions on anything in the document, we're going to affirmatively present the mandatory elements of the master plan. So that would be the statement of goals and objectives, the land use plan element, and the housing plan element. So, moving right along, a little more on background. Margate, I think, as we all know, is in a transition period. Historically, we've been a small, primarily year-round community, residential in character, with a population that topped out in 1970 at about 10,000 people. Since then, the trends, since the 70s, I should say, the trends have led to a decline in the city's year-round population. And in 2016, the census put us at 6,000 people. This transition took us from a bear with me, I'm sorry. Took us from a seasonal took us from a permanent population, heavily weighted permanent population, to more of a weighted seasonal population, and has stressed the city's services. It has stressed the city's municipal services. It has stressed the city's schools and businesses and religious institutions. And all of that information and the background for that came as part of the SWOT analysis and interviews that Spectrum Gaming did, and we'll get into that a little later. So, as I said before, the municipal land use law establishes a number of mandatory and optional elements. Not all are applicable to Margate, 9 of which were in the city's RFP and that we responded to and that we put together in front of you. And again, we're going to go through just the We're going to review the city's history. We're going to document the progress. Back up. Document the progress towards prior goals and objectives, and develop plans and strategies for how the city can continue to adapt and thrive into the future under this new paradigm. So the SWOT analysis details the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats that are facing the city. Spectrum conducted 6 meetings between November of 2015 and March of 2016 with groups of people that were broken down by interest group. So we had restaurant owners in one meeting. I think you got to click it. We had retail store owners in another meeting. We had Marina District businesses, local builders and architects, local realtors and attorneys, and religious institutions, schools, the city rec department, and people who represent the social side of the city as opposed to the business side of the city. Also included were city representatives at various levels, including elected officials. And I see Mayor and Mr. Amadeo, pardon my back, pardon my front, in the, pardon? Sir, yeah. Committee person. Who were very heavily involved in help bringing the groups together, help guiding us, help setting the tone. The interviews that were undertaken were very frank, informal, very wide-ranging, and if you have any questions, Joe Weinert from Spectrum Gaming is here to discuss that, but they were very informative, and we can't thank all the participants enough for the information that they gave us. So the first thing we're going to delve into is the statement of objectives, principles, assumptions, policies, and standards. As part of this, we looked at the 1980 master plan, the 1990 master plan, the 2004 master plan, and the 2006 master plan reexamination, which detailed the history of what were the issues that faced the city at that time. What we did under this comprehensive master plan update is utilize these efforts as background and then took the information from the SWOT analyses to develop a current set of policies and objectives. The statement reflects each of the principal areas contained in the master plan, but again, tonight we're only going to go through the housing plan element and the land use plan element, those policies. So the first policy, it's a general policy that the municipal land use law grants municipalities the power to control the physical development of the lands within their corporate boundaries and provides 15 guiding purposes to be achieved by the land use and the development regulations. You all know what these are. These are the, I want a variance, and in support of that variance, I have a hardship, and I'm relying on the purpose of municipal land use law I, or the purpose F, or whatever they are. They are all listed as part of the master plan. I don't want to go through them individually, but you are all familiar with them, and they're in the document itself. So this, what we're recommending is, in terms of these principles, purposes, the city affirms its commitment to these purposes and adopts them as general guidelines for this master plan, for the land use development ordinance that will follow, and for policies and practices for all appropriate municipal agencies in the administration of their duties and their responsibilities. Principle B. The city recognizes that it has undergone a significant transition from a community primarily of full-time residents to primarily a second home community. That is something that we have talked about before. It came through pretty much all of the SWOT interviews. The objective tied to that is to preserve and restore the city's full-time population as much as is possible, understanding there are challenges there. Another principle, Margate recognizes that significant progress is required in many areas to ensure the sustainability and continued viability of the community against extreme weather events such as Sandy and sea level rise and climate change, and that the severity and frequency of these events is projected to increase over time, and that an uncertain amount of sea level rise is expected. So in terms of objectives tied to that principle, the city should review the vulnerabilities of existing municipal infrastructure and update municipal policies to ensure that it is taking steps to protect all municipal infrastructure, but especially critical infrastructure from sea level rise and significant storm events. Another objective is to review and update municipal policies and regulations to ensure that the city is permitting, promoting, and requiring, where appropriate, measures to protect private development from sea level rise and significant storm events. Those are our overall general policies. Now we're going to get into specific land use policies. The city recognizes that development and redevelopment is trending towards larger homes, and that buyers are primarily second homeowners with other non-full-time residential uses. Objective is to continue to plan and zone to preserve the character and appeal of existing neighborhoods, to evaluate lot coverage and bulk standards and consider reducing building footprint, overall building size, and bulk allowances, to preserve, expand to the maximum extent practicable the number of families that are full-time residents in the city, to evaluate the zoning boundaries for consistency with the type and character of existing development, Principle B, Margate recognizes that land development in the city has been driven by residential property values and that the viability of commercial districts is threatened by financial pressures generated by the residential market. The city also recognizes that sustaining commercial areas is critical to the long-term attractiveness of the city as a premier shore community. That's something that came through a lot in terms of maintaining the city's commercial base. So in terms of objectives, we would look to review and update municipal policies and regulations to ensure that commercial districts are contiguous and cohesive, and we're going to get into that a little more tonight, to the maximum extent practicable, and that district boundaries are defensible and sensible. We want to review and update municipal policies and regulations to ensure that commercial development regulations permit and promote economic viability and development in the city. We want to make sure that we want to develop, and implement right-of-way design guidelines to create commercial districts that are distinct and recognizable to the motor public, essentially streetscape improvements that are going to identify our commercial areas. We're going to determine appropriate locations and regulations for outdoor product placement, sidewalk sales, and outdoor dining options. New Principle C. Margate recognizes that waterfront property in the city possesses unique characteristics and value because of its proximity and access to the water, and that includes both the Waterfront Special Improvement District and residential areas with water access. So an objective there is to adopt development regulations that acknowledge the unique character of waterfront property. Right now, you have waterfront zones that have regulations that are similar to more inland sections of the city, and we think there's a way to deal with the waterfront zones that recognize their special character. Margate recognizes that the Waterfront Special District provides unique value to the city, and the city should continue to pursue revitalization efforts in this location. Basically, this deals with the area down along Amherst Avenue. The objectives are to consider recommendations of prior studies of the Waterfront Special District portion of Amherst Avenue, to adopt a street and promenade configuration to enhance the waterfront special district, and to address parking needs and evaluate bulkhead replacement along Amherst Avenue, to declare a portion of the district to be in need of redevelopment and partner with a commercial developer to develop underutilized existing facilities, to identify existing ordinance and regulations that restrict business hours and other activities and consider permitting additional outdoor hours additional operating hours and additional outdoor activities, to support bayfront commercial activity by pursuing dredging opportunities to maintain access to boat slips and navigable waters. New Principle E, the city recognizes that it has very few large parcels which are appropriate for public, religious, and civic uses in the city, and that many of the non-public entities which control these parcels face uncertain futures, and that large parcels of land in the city that they control could be converted to residential housing. I think you're going to see part of that conversation in the application you have after us tonight. So the objective there would be to identify large lots in the city and ensure that zoning requires continued civic or institutional use. New principle, the city recognizes that it lacks transient housing options for short-term guests and visitors to stay overnight, and that transient visitors could support the local commercial sector, particularly food service establishments, more than second homeowners do. So the objective there would be to identify an area in the city that would be appropriate to develop short-term transient housing option. Effectively, that would be some version of a motel, a hotel. I know that there was an effort in the city years ago, almost decades ago, to reduce hotels and motels. That was wildly successful, but I think ultimately to the detriment of the city's economic base. New principle. Pardon me. Margate recognizes that recent development applications have ignored architectural detail in favor of less expensive, often bland, stark, and utilitarian facades designed to detract from the aesthetics of the city. And while the planning board has had some success in encouraging developers to design buildings with more variety and interest, your power to compel better design is somewhat limited. So the objectives there would be to establish within the land use plan and the development ordinance specific architectural design standards to promote a desirable visual environment and ensure the continued visual integrity of both the commercial and residential sections of town, and to reevaluate building and zoning regulations and revise them where appropriate to allow for more architectural creativity. Housing policy. This is where we get into a little bit of if you'll bear with me a second. A little bit of a controversial issue. In terms of housing, the almost constant state of litigation between the various stakeholders, interest groups, and governmental entities responsible for affordable housing in New Jersey, dating at least as far back as 1999, has made it all but impossible for the city to determine the rules and regulations that would govern any fair share housing plan that the city might seek to adopt. So preparation of a compliant plan, one that would balance the fiduciary responsibility to wisely spend taxpayer funds and the constitutional obligation that the city has to provide its fair share of affordable housing as required by the 1985 Fair Housing Act, has been viewed by the city historically as almost an impossible exercise. Given such uncertainty, the city has historically, and I think wisely, deferred action on meeting its COA obligations until a realistic and unchallenged formula for calculating Margate's fair share of affordable housing. In short, it's been a moving target. And I don't know anybody other than people who would gain by it could, with a straight face, say, Margate, go spend a lot of money developing a plan, when every 6 months some new court decision renders the legal basis for what that plan would say to be invalid. So towns who are pursuing this bounce back and forth between sets of regulations that change a couple times a year, or certainly several times a decade. So while waiting for this to occur, and people might remember this, the state Supreme Court in March of 2015 declared New Jersey's affordable housing processes as non-functioning and removed the jurisdiction of the issue from COA and placed it under the Superior Court. So while COA still exists as a state agency, it no longer has the authority to regulate low-income housing, the number of low-income housing and moderate-income housing units that each municipality is required to provide. Municipalities have been judged, new paragraph, pardon me. Having said all that, these courts have judged municipalities who have not acted in accordance with the COA policies, to have acted in bad faith and have been treated harshly by the court system. So while the legislature attempts to address the root causes of affordable housing in New Jersey, and the cities are stuck between a rock and a hard place in terms of trying to figure out what their requirements are and how they are to address them, the courts are coming back and saying, well, but you municipalities, you haven't acted. So therefore, we are going to mandate that you provide a certain amount of affordable housing, whatever that number is. Now, what does that really mean? Some people will say, well, Margate, we don't have any vacant land, except that you do. And a judge could say that, for example, the field across Amherst Avenue from Thai School should be developed, should be taken from the school and developed as low and moderate income housing. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not saying a judge would do that, but it's in their power to do it. They could say that a particular area of town where you have a 1.5-story height limit should go up to 4 stories, and that be developed as affordable housing. They could say that the area where the school is, where the Union Avenue School is, part of that land should be developed as affordable housing. And all of that is to say that it takes the local control away. If the city has been viewed by the particular judge as sticking its head in the sand and not being responsive.
Didn't you tell me that Margate was one of those cities they thought was sticking its head in the sand along with North Wildwood?
I know that North Wildwood was. What I can tell you is that Margate could be viewed that. I didn't say it was viewed that way. The issue has not come before the court, and we all thank God for that. But if it were to come before the court, based on what I learned about the North Wildwood situation, I can very much see a judge responding in that manner.
Could I ask one more question?
Please, please, no, please.
Because certainly it's not going to be unilaterally raised. Is it a citizen or is it a community? How is that issue raised?
the speaker, please?
How is that issue going to be challenged or raised to a judge?
I would
brought to the courts?
Ultimately, I would defer that to Stan, to your attorney, but I can tell you that anybody who feels they have standing can sue. So it could be a citizen. It could be, and this is more likely, the Fair Share Housing Center, which is a nonprofit group out of Cherry Hill, Mount Laurel, whose mission it is to go find areas where they feel towns have not provided their fair share of affordable housing and institute a suit.
Couldn't it be a builder that wants to build
And it
low-income
could be a
housing?
builder who decides that they want more density than your current zoning allows, so they're going to file a builder's remedy suit with with the court against the city. I think the affordable housing piece is one of these things where almost anybody has standing to file a suit. So it just matters what their motivations are and whether they have the wherewithal to pursue the litigation.
For Margate to protect itself, couldn't we view the case law and simply follow some of the things that the judges are ordering to be within their realm of what they're saying they want to see?
It is.
Because if
That-
there's no COA officially saying what to do, couldn't we just look at those cases to protect ourselves?
You could, and that's actually one of our recommendations. And the idea is, and there have been towns that have done this, and Wildwood actually did this, not North Wildwood, but Wildwood, is that they had a builder's remedy case. They created a zone in their downtown where they provided for low and moderate income housing above their commercial. And they did a number of other things, and their attorney went to court and said, look, Judge, COA is all over the place. COA was in effect at the time, but the rules are all over the place. This is what the city does. What we would like is a declaration that what the city has done is fine for now, and the city should be protected from builder's remedy suits until the issue is resolved at the state level. And they were granted that order. So it isn't that you can go and say, hey, we don't know what's going on, just grant us the order. You've got to come forward with some affirmative plan that the judge will say, hey, that's a pretty good plan. We're going to accept that until we know what's going on.
Would that short-term housing that you discussed just prior to this section, would that satisfy
No.
the housing that they're looking for?
The
They're just-
housing that they're looking for has to be deed restrict. What the short term, what we were talking for
Right.
was basically hotels. It was visitor housing, hotels, motels. The units that they are requiring under the law have to be deed restricted for 30 years to low and moderate income. Uses. So I will tell you, for example, in Egg Harbor Township, they have, it's not a planning term, but a boatload of trailers that the census has said qualifies as low and moderate income based on the income of the people that are living there. But that's not acceptable to the state because they're not deed restricted for 30 years to low and moderate income housing. Housing vouchers, Section 8 housing vouchers do not qualify because those vouchers are portable. The vouchers go to the individuals, not the housing unit. So if I have a voucher, I can move it whenever I want. My unit will be low and moderate income because I'm low and moderate income. But the units themselves can't be counted towards your number because you never know when I may vacate it and somebody else might come in who's not low and moderate income. So it's a mess. I think the state Supreme Court recognized that it's a mess when they took it away from COA, and now they're dealing with it. You know, each judge is dealing with each town individually, and there are no good answers. So, and by the way, I want to thank you for jumping in during all of this. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to chime in, interrupt us, because if we wait to the end, we may not. Somebody's going to forget. We may not realize where we were. So, Ryan, in terms of housing policy, again, getting back to where we started the conversation, real estate market demand in Margate has shifted a large portion of the city's housing inventory from year-round to seasonal occupancy, thereby reducing the number of housing units available for full-time residents. This, combined with the relatively high purchase price for housing in the city, has made it all but unaffordable for people of low and moderate incomes to live in town. So in terms of objectives, and these are all in no particular order, but consider a residential redevelopment plan to develop market rate residences that are affordable to locally employed individuals and families. Try to use the redevelopment law to find a way to bring families back in town. Develop incentives for full-time resident families to encourage existing families to stay in Margate and new families to relocate to the city. Maintain the land use plan and land development ordinance as a rational plan to regulate development patterns in town and reinforce the integrity of the city's residential neighborhoods and commercial districts. Establish within the land use plan and development ordinance specific standards to ensure the continued integrity of the residential sections of the city. Principle B, Margate recognizes that its population is aging and that the population has needs that differ from the needs of families that used to inhabit the island, as well as the new families coming in as seasonal residents. So in terms of objectives, evaluate the adequacy of emergency services during the peak summer season when the city's population swells to many times the number of full-time residents, and consider zoning for medical offices and other healthcare related facilities to service this aging population. Again, and this gets back to what we talked about before, the city has historically deferred action on meeting its obligation under COA until COA could establish a realistic and unchallenged formula for calculating Margate's fair share of affordable housing.
Start. Small back.
Sure.
Back a little bit, but you said, huh?
You don't have to press it.
Oh, okay. All right. You said develop incentives for full-time resident families to encourage existing families to stay in Margate and new families to relocate in Margate. What do you mean by incentives?
We can't be specific. We don't know. There are, the goal when we started the master plan from the city fathers was that we wanted to try to find a way to keep families in town and to bring new families into town. What we would be hopeful to do as part of a larger effort, larger than this master plan, is to figure some way to incent families to come and live in Margate.
Well, the only way you're going to do that is to provide affordable housing. Because, right?
Well, you know what? I'll give you, for example, and this is, the reason we didn't put examples in here is because there is a lot of thought that needs to go into them. And we didn't want to go down a particular rabbit hole, have the planning board endorse something that ultimately proved to be unworkable. But so just in terms of what if we went to, the city went to a local bank and said, how about providing a down payment assistance for families to come and live in Margate for X number of years? What if the city provided, if you have kids in the school, that there would be some kind of financial assistance? Maybe it's a tax, some type of tax incentive to lower your property taxes. Maybe it's, as a number of people during the interviews had said, maybe it's a gift card to go over the bridge a dozen times a day. I don't know what they are. But the idea was, let the master plan say, Margate planners, go be creative and see if you can come up with something that works.
Could I bring one up?
Sure.
Our land cost, our construction values. I don't see how the housing gets into that. How any bank or anybody would even step in and say, yeah, we can afford to do that and we'll be able to sustain this. I don't see that happening.
And it may not, which again is why we didn't want to put specifics in here. There are, the city has some grant people. There are planners out there who deal with this specifically. I almost said there are people a lot smarter than us on this side of the room, but that's not true. But the idea is, what if the city declared a portion of town to be in need of redevelopment.
Who's gonna sell it for the low cost?
Pardon me?
Who's gonna sell their ground for that low cost? The bank will say, yeah, that's a good idea.
There, again, details. The devil is always in the detail, which is why we didn't put it in.
Okay.
Which is why we understood this is a very difficult thing. Essentially, what we have to do is create mechanisms that are going to adjust the market. We know that the real estate community may have problems with it. We know that the builders may have problems with it. We may not find anybody who's willing to put up the money. But we felt, given the nature of what the city wanted to accomplish in terms of bringing families back, combined with the conversation for affordable housing in Margate, there needs to be a discussion that is beyond the master plan discussion, that really involves the city government, the something that's beyond the planning board. So, that being said, what we wrote for you, and again, all of this, we wrote it, it's your policies. These are things that you either endorse or tell us to change. But what we wrote is, it's the opinion of the planning board that Margate no longer has the luxury of delay on the affordable housing issue, and that it should proceed. Is there another, can you click that? This is more of the same. Hit it again. So, the next step would be, if you adopt this policy, is that it would be recommended that the city, in cooperation with the planning board, prepare a fair share plan in accordance with the requirements of the Fair Housing Act. And that would be filed with COA. It's still there as a governmental agency, and it would be used as the basis to support the city's position should somebody decide to make this an issue. Somebody take the city to court. Okay. That deals with all of the policies and assumptions and goals and objectives that is required in the statement that we talked about for the mandatory elements of the master plan. There are a number of policy goals and objectives that deal with the optional elements of the master plan that are there. They're for you to read, they're for you to adopt, but in terms of timing, we thought it would be best, and we spoke with Mr. Patterson about this, it would be best to focus on the mandatory elements. So having said that, we've gone through all of the goals and objectives and policies, and what I'd like to do now is to turn it over to Ryan, who's going to talk about the land use plan element.
So we wanted to talk to you about all of the zones.
Isn't there
No. Ryan.
We got the stand, we never got the mic. Just wonder why this is over here.
Is it not on?
It's on.
It's on.
It's directional, just point it right at your mouth.
Start singing.
Did it turn off, Jim?
There it is. Okay, now that that's over with. So we wanted to review all of the changes, what your existing zoning was, what all our recommendations were, and what the goals were for why we did, or why we're proposing what we're proposing. So we'll start with general commercial goals. We wanted to preserve existing commercial areas. What's that?
Which page are you?
Which page of? This is not a direct page of the master plan. It's sort of a summary of the work that we did. So you don't have anything directly there to follow. You have to look up to one of the screens, I suppose. So, so our goals for the commercial areas were the preservation of the commercial areas, to create more contiguous commercial areas, and to craft the zones that sort of acknowledge some of the existing uses in areas where you have commercial zones where there's non-commercial uses, and other areas where you have commercial uses with non-commercial zones. So we'll go quick zone by zone. You have a C1 zone, which is neighborhood commercial. Right now there's only 2 locations. But oddly, in that zone, residential ground floor is currently permitted. So what we proposed to do was expand one of the existing C1 zones near the intersection of Jerome Avenue and Ventnor Avenue. Actually convert the other one into a new district, which is along Washington Avenue, which I'll show you on the map. It'll make a little more sense. And then we also propose to eliminate ground floor residential as a permitted use. Because if you allow ground floor residential in the middle of your commercial district, and market forces are dictating residential development, it has the possibility of eroding your commercial development very quickly. And given that one of our goals was to preserve commercial development to the maximum extent practicable, obviously we're trying to get away from allowing residential. So one of the existing zones that you have, like I said, is at the intersection of Jerome and Ventnor Avenues, right at the entrance to the parkway. There's a couple little tiny businesses and then a restaurant across the corner from Blessed Sacrament. We're proposing to expand that zone to include additional commercial development and religious institutions that are adjacent, in hopes to preserve the larger properties, and hope that if they were ever converted from non-religious and non-profit uses, they would be, preserved as larger parcels. And then, like I said, acknowledge some of the commercial development that's currently zoned as residential.
Ryan, if I may, just while we're on that piece, the one piece that is sort of essential, right in the nexus of that pink L, is the Emma Shalom property, which was part of the conversation that you heard, the first part of the application last week or last meeting, and is going to be on, as I understand it, next tonight. When we originally wrote this and submitted it, it was before the last application, or the application that came in, and the recommendation was that it be commercial. We understand that you have testimony before you suggesting reasons that it not be commercial and that it be residential. So we wanted to make sure that what we said here doesn't prejudice that application, which really came before the board before this conversation. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Okay. So the other section of C1 district that the city currently has is along Washington Avenue, approximately connecting from the Bayfront area to the central business district. And as you can see, we're actually proposing a whole separate district for that area, and we'll get into that. But if you'll notice that the boundaries are, again, a lot more contiguous. They actually connect full areas. There's not gaps. And that again was one of our objectives. C2 professional commercial. Right now the city only has one section of C2 commercial. Again, it's pretty fragmented. It's sort of a transition from Longport to your central business district. And again, we're going to propose to make it more contiguous. We propose to use professional, medical, and real estate offices, and use retail only as an accessory to the permitted use. This is not your central downtown area. This is not a great spot for an open storefront, someone selling beach chairs and things of that nature. It seems to be a much better fit for a real estate office, an attorney, medical practice, something of that nature. And if you take a look at the existing boundaries, it's sort of the brown area to the left there. You can see it's sort of spotty along Ventnor Avenue. We're proposing to make it one larger contiguous district and have it end exactly where the central business district starts. So that you have a, sort of hard transition from, this is the professional development area, this is the central business district area. So moving right along to the central business district, you actually have two central business districts, and again, they're somewhat fragmented. This is the area that we heard the most concern about eroding the boundaries of the sort of core commercial areas. So this is an area we really tried to focus on more contiguous and a more defendable perimeter, so that you guys could draw the line and say, no, in this area, this is central business district. We need businesses here. We need to maintain our commercial base. To that end, we would recommend that you require ground floor commercial, which is currently not required. And in an attempt to spur some development and really promote and support the commercial development, we would recommend allowing a third floor for upper floor residential uses. You can get a lot more investment. Again, residential drives the market. I think we've said that a few times today. So if you allow for residential development above a commercial development, even if the commercial development can break even, if they can make money on the residential development, you may see more economic activity in your downtown and be able to support the commercial district that you need and want, with the money-making residential upstairs. So this is one of your central business districts. It's sort of centered along Washington Avenue and Ventnor Avenue. As you can see, it's again a bit fragmented. Some of it's a bit misleading because one of the buildings in this is actually the building that we're in. The one at the corner, the largest, is currently zoned government owned. So that would all of this would become part of the central business district. And the other large parcel that would go in would be where Lucy currently sits. There's already effectively a business there, so it sort of fits with the commercial business district. And then your other central business district is towards the north end of town, Ventnor and Essex Avenue primarily. Currently, you have a good number of properties along Atlantic Avenue that are districted as residential, two-family at the moment. And many of them are commercial, and clearly most of the buildings were commercial at one time, even if they're residential now. So it would be our recommendation that along Atlantic Avenue, they be required to be commercial. And then we have a small change along Douglas Avenue, a project that was actually permitted, I believe, a few years ago at this board. That area is already a multifamily development. So expanding the pink zone that you see there to encapsulate the multifamily development that was already built just acknowledges what's there and the reality that that's probably not going to go back to commercial anytime soon. So next we'll move on to the Waterfront Special District. Currently there are commercial uses at sidewalk level. Most of them are either marina related or more likely restaurants. There's a significant lack of parking in the area, and oddly still ground floor residential is permitted in the zone currently. So we're proposing some minor boundary changes, really just to eliminate some of the housing that's in there now that shouldn't be in the zone, to allow significantly higher first floor elevations with no ground floor residential permitted. But again, residential permitted above the commercial uses to try to encourage commercial development on the ground floor. We would also, once structures are allowed to be elevated, you would have the potential to expand parking options by allowing parking under some of the structures. If your first floor has to be 10 feet or so above the street level, it's possible that you could have parking, at least the front halves of vehicles or any number of configurations, to allow for additional parking partially or somewhat under the structures. So that's a potential way to eliminate some of the parking issues. And then another recommendation would be to consider some of the recommendations from the Phase 1 study that was conducted by Ponzio, which was the Amherst Avenue improvements. There's a series of recommendations all to improve the aesthetic character and parking options along Amherst Avenue. And we definitely strongly would recommend that the city consider those options moving forward. They alleviate a lot of problems. They make it a lot more attractive to pedestrians, created more parking options. So, the certainly not going to pick one of the options that were presented, but again, we would encourage that the city strongly consider them. That's all. Moving on to the residential zones. Some of the goals that we had really were to preserve the neighborhood character and to accommodate new flood elevations. As you know, most of the homes in the city were originally built well below modern flood elevations, so that presents a series of challenges to the city. By zone, we'll try to go through quickly. The S60 zone is currently the Parkway District along Bayshore Drive, and the north area is sort of in that conservation area. We're recommending a new zone for waterfront properties so that the parkway and homes along the waterfront are not zoned the same. As you can imagine, the challenges and demands for houses in those two locations are going to be significantly different, so they should be acknowledged and treated that way and have zoning that's appropriate for where they are. We're proposing some minor boundary changes around Jerome Avenue just to accommodate some of the other things that are happening, particularly in commercial districts. And then we suggest removing tennis courts as a permitted use in the S60 zones. We just sort of felt that if someone was going to build a tennis court next to your house, you should probably get to know about it before they get started. So, just a suggestion of that. So this is the proposed zoning changes along the waterfront at Bayshore Drive. It's essentially a conversion of what's there, with the exception of the houses that are currently zoned S60 that are not immediately adjacent to water, they're not waterfront property, would move into an adjacent zone. So the S50 zone picks up a couple of homes over near Bayshore Drive West cul-de-sac, and then the S40 would pick up a couple near the entrance to the cul-de-sac on the other side. But other than that, the zoning boundary would essentially stay the same. This area that we considered your North Conservation Area, it was fragmented between government-owned and the S60 zone, and we suspected it was made S60 just to make it unbuildable, so the largest lot size possible. So rather than do that, we have a new proposed zone that we'll get into later that would just encompass that entire area. So you eliminate S60 from that whole area. Moving on to S50, the only area that exists in the city is in the northeast corner near Bayshore Drive. The only boundary changes we just reviewed in the last map, and there's no real significant changes proposed other than that. And that's just sort of an overall proposed zoning. If you look up, again, along Bayshore Drive is the only spots with the S50. Next we have the S40. S40 is spread throughout the city, and actually the majority of the city's waterfront properties in the S40 zone. So a similar recommendation to the S60, we felt like the S60, or S40 rather, waterfront homes should be their own zone, should be treated separately, have separate zoning that addresses the needs and demands of waterfront property.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What is the purpose of making the waterfront properties its own zone? What are the advantages of that?
Well, your zones set your setbacks, your coverage, your lot coverage, your decks. So if you're in an S40 zone, and I want to build if I'm in the middle of the city and I want to build a deck in my backyard, building it up to the property line might be an issue because I'm a neighbor, presumably, who lives behind me. If I'm on the waterfront, if I build a deck to the bulkhead or to the property line, there's no one behind me. There's no impact.
Right.
So it's a very different area. You want to have different regulations to address that.
Okay. That's good.
So again, these are the only real significant changes to the S40. You can see that there's sort of a dark purple perimeter that follows the water line, but that's really the only significant change. It would just be the S40 waterfront would be broken out separately. And then one minor note, in the North Conservation Area, there are some homes that are in the S60 that are currently constructed, sort of in the bottom right corner of each of the two graphics. So there would be a small pocket of S40 that would develop immediately adjacent to some other that already exists. So this is the S30 zone. There's 4 concentrated pockets of S30 throughout the city, and half of the city's beach blocks are actually S30 zone. That zone seems to be doing okay. The S25 zone is the city's largest contiguous zone. It covers the area's sort of older core housing stock generally. again, no significant changes proposed. The S25 HD zone is your historic residential district. It covers the Marvin Gardens area. The majority of that area was constructed prior to 1930, so issues with raising homes is a particular interest there. Through the land development ordinance, special attention needs to be paid for how those homes can be raised, paying careful consideration to the neighborhood character and what makes it a historic district. If you don't allow the homes to elevate, eventually they'll just get destroyed. But if you do allow them to elevate, you risk damaging the historic character of the neighborhood by, lifting these homes up 8 or 10 feet, whatever's necessary. So it's our recommendation that a very careful look at the regulations in S25 HD zone occur when the land development ordinance is worked on. Next is the two-family. There's 3 areas across the city. Most of these homes are constructed before 1950. Again, no real significant changes proposed. Multifamily is the majority of the area south and west of Decatur Avenue. Units there range from an 18-story condo to single-family homes. But again, no significant changes there. So last, we're going to move into non-commercial residential zoning. And the goal of these zones that we're going to talk about is really to preserve large parcels and to promote more contiguous zoning. So one of them that you have is the riparian zone. It currently covers only riparian lots. There's nothing you can really do with that. It's not a land area. That's the only zoning that makes sense. So we're not proposing any changes there. You currently have a government-owned zone, which is intended to cover all municipally owned properties. The zoning map as it is now doesn't exactly agree. So you have some properties that are zoned government-owned that aren't owned by the government, and some properties that are government-owned that aren't zoned GO. So our proposal, frankly, is to just eliminate the GO zone. It's not necessary. The city is completely exempt from its own zoning standards. So if you own the property, it doesn't matter what zone you're in. Again, we're proposing to eliminate the zone and create an institutional or potentially another and a beach zone. And we'll talk about that in a minute also.
Could I ask a question about that?
Sure.
I think you answered it as you continued, but if we're not calling it government-owned, what would we be calling it then?
Frankly, the government-owned could be part of any adjacent zoning, and it doesn't matter to the city. The city's not impeded from doing whatever they want to do. Because they're not restricted to the local zoning laws.
Wouldn't it help, though, if, say, someone's looking at the map, we know this designated area is government property?
Sure, you can call that out in another way. The problem is when you have a government-owned zone, when things change, if the city sells a property or someone goes into foreclosure, you end up with properties that are government-owned that aren't GO zoned, and then properties that are not government-owned that are in the GO zone. It's just difficult to keep track of, and frankly, it's not helpful from a zoning standpoint. You can represent that other ways. We can print a map that shows city-owned properties, but to have a dedicated zone for that, it doesn't serve any real purpose for the city.
I understand what you're saying, but I see 10+ zones.
Yeah.
And if we're gonna have all these zones, we're gonna have a historical district, why shouldn't the city be have designated property protected?
So the historical district protects development in that area because applications that come in are subject to that zoning. The city could be in the historical district, and if they own that building, they could knock it down and build a skyscraper if they want to. They're not subject to the zoning. So having a government-owned zone doesn't give you the ability to do anything more or less than you have if you're in any other zone. So the only thing it does is it complicates things greatly when you have a private lot in the government-owned zone. Because, for example, the government-owned zone had a 4-acre minimum lot size. So if the city sells a piece of property, or frankly, some of them were just mapped incorrectly. We had a couple properties that were government-owned that were owned by an individual. If they came in and tried to apply to do something, they're in the GO zone that requires 4 acres, so they're stuck. They can't do anything. It's not a zone that allows you to do anything, and it doesn't offer the government any protection.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
And I think, just to reiterate what Ryan said, municipalities by law are exempt from their own zoning. So if you have a property anywhere in the city and the city wants to do, or if the city has a property anywhere in town and it wants to do something with it, it should not be constrained by what the zoning map says and what the zoning ordinance says if it comes up with a particular use that it finds necessary. So that being said, it didn't seem to make any sense for zoning by ownership, which is basically what that was.
I'm sorry, that just raises another question. I understand that the city can acquire additional properties that may be privately owned prior to them acquiring them, but the predominantly government-owned buildings, our city halls, those buildings that aren't going to change, that are very visibly theirs. Why get rid of that clarification?
You're preserving, by keeping the government-owned zone, you're preserving a zone that offers nothing except a distinction when you look at the zoning map to know that the city owns that, probably.
But isn't that helpful? At the
We've-
very least, isn't that helpful to say there's?
I could very
Stu,
easily bring
We,
that-
we've had a case where the problem comes when the government sells its land to somebody, and then they can't do what they want to do with the land, and we have to go through the process of getting it out of government control.
Yeah,
Whereas if it's government-owned land, it should conform to whatever zone it's in if it ever leaves public, government hand. And it happens along the beach where the government owns little strips here and there and the people want to put bulkheads in, but it's still government zoned and it's a pain to change it.
We would be very happy to put together a government-owned land map, a city-owned land map that you could look at in companion with the zoning map. That's not a problem. We just don't believe, from a planning standpoint, that the city gains anything by having that zone. And it seems like there are a number of problems that arise from that. Not the least of which we didn't discuss, is if you really took a look at how these things are pocketed out, it's spot zoning all over town.
From what Rich said, I think that really clarified for me. It helps the city to not have it.
That's why he's the
what
chairman.
I wanted to know. Yeah.
Okay. So, in lieu of the government-owned zone, we're proposing two replacements. Again, one is an institutional use, the other is a beach. The institutional use, the goal is to preserve larger parcels and their uses. You currently have a lot of larger parcels, churches and nonprofit institutions that may not be that way forever. And as an example, yeah, I don't know if you can see. Jump to the map real quick. I think you have this in your slides also. The synagogue property and the JCC property, there's approximately 40 lots that could be developed in those areas if they decided to move offshore, if they decided to do anything else. So there's a pretty significant financial incentive for that to happen given property values. Those are the kinds of community institutions that you need to be a desirable place. So the institutional use would require large minimum lot sizes and would require religious, institutional, recreational, large-scale commercial, and government uses. And that again, it covers your government-owned lots. Most of the government-owned lots would be moved into this zone, frankly. But it allows you to preserve the things that you want to try to preserve. And in fact, we had a potential replacement for institutional, since that didn't sound as fun. We had the surf zone as social utility, religious, and fraternal as a possible alternative. So,
What's in the name?
there you go. And next is the proposed beach zone. This would be a zone that it literally only covers the beach area. It would permit no structural development because you can't, frankly, without getting CAFR approval. And it does only cover city-owned properties. Frankly, this zone wouldn't regulate any kind of development. It's only city-owned properties. But zoning it anything else, to your concern previously, would sort of be confusing and disingenuous. You wouldn't want to merge that with the riparian zone or the residential zones adjacent to it. Just reflecting it as the beach and acknowledging that you can't develop there, we thought was the most clear and straightforward way to handle it. So that's our recommendation.
Now, Ryan, that would go up to the existing bulkhead line where it is now?
Yeah, it would be the bulkhead line up to the high tide line where the riparian zone would.
So it may not reflect the current line as there now?
Yeah, no, the zone boundary would have to be matched exactly to what the bulkhead line would be. 'Cause I think the way it's currently drawn was more following property lines and not the bulkhead line. So we'd have to go back and a little more precisely draw that.
So the upland portion of that would, even if it's a small piece of land, would be subject to the contiguous zone, residential zone? But that would help the city also?
Yeah, absolutely, because
Okay.
as you said before, you've been going through sales where you're turning them over to adjacent property owners, correct?
Correct.
So that would put them in the zone, they wouldn't have to be split zoned, it would just sort of clarify things for them.
Are those S40 waterfronts, Rumson and Osborne, are they right up to the high tide line? Those ones that stick all the way out to the...
No, the way that the zoning is on the bay side, some of the homes have a significant portion that is not considered riparian, that's technically their lot.
Beach I'm talking about.
Oh, on the beach side.
These two that touch the ocean.
They actually, yeah, they actually don't touch the ocean, that's where the riparian
Is that the
land
high
goes
tide
to.
line? Is that the high tide line?
There's some gap in between the high tide line and the bulkhead.
Okay.
So those would kind of be peeled back to match the bulkhead. It's,
Rich, there's also an area there where the Friar's house is, where they actually own the land that goes out into the ocean. So that is part of what's designated there.
all right, so any more questions about that before we move on?
Real quick, I'm looking at this map here, and you're showing institutional zones for the ball fields on Jerome Avenue,
Yes.
and then the synagogues,
Yes.
okay? But then you're taking the Catholic facility and making it a commercial zone. Why
Well,
wouldn't that be institutional
We
and
tried to
preserved
move.
also?
We tried to move properties into what had adjacent contiguous uses. So in the commercial area where you have commercial development on this side and commercial development on this side and a large contiguous parcel in the middle, rather than break them up with an institutional use in the middle, we tried to just keep that as, this is a commercial area. If you want to,
Again,
But you actually did that on Union Avenue, right in the middle of the zone, because it's City Hall. It just doesn't, there's very
We're-
little purple, pink there,
what we were trying to do
and it
as
looks like it's excluding it.
Well, what we were trying to do is avoid situations where it's spot zoning. In terms of the church is generally surrounded by commercial. In terms of the zone.
yeah, and when you look along Jerome Avenue,
And it would be a permitted
Basically,
use
you
in
only
that
have
zone.
two little pieces on the other side of Ventnor Avenue, and then you have the little corner all the way on the other side of Jerome. That doesn't look contiguous to me. And if anything, the piece on the opposite side of Jerome will eventually go away and be housing anyway.
originally our boundary was right here. So we have a larger contiguous zone in this whole area.
But that's not what,
That's what I'm saying.
I would
Originally,
like to see
the
commercial
application
there and
a
residential.
few weeks ago, we had that parcel. So as Stuart said earlier, as to not prejudice you against it, we moved that, and we kept that in the zone it is currently. However,
It was changed because it was deed restricted, and it couldn't
right,
change to
so that's
commercial.
gonna become residential, and then you're gonna plop the only Catholic institution in school in the city as C1 so that it gets eaten up and moved out. That doesn't make sense.
Well, no,
If it
that
was
it
institutional,
it was
which is
certainly
what
not
the
the
plan
intent.
is calling for, then that would be preserved and it would dedicate what could be done there. You're opening the door to getting rid of it, which to me makes no sense.
That was not the intention.
Yeah, right,
That's what it is. I don't
right now,
agree
it's
with it.
actually residential, so our thought process was if we move it to commercial, there would be far less development pressure on it than it, as it sits
Yeah.
now as residential.
See, they want to make.
Not the way we
This
give
is the existing.
commercial variances on this board. If that was institutional, it would stay institutional. It would follow the precepts that you put forward earlier in this thing about preserving the religious, the institutional, and the sections. You're actually carving a section out that is that and not including it. It doesn't make sense to me.
We would, if the board so directs us, we would absolutely change that, it's up to the board.
While I once again disagree with Mr. Collins here, that we have a commercial area there that can be expanded, and it is not, there's nothing institutional around there other than like all the other parcels are. And the discussion with all city heads and everyone, when we had those meetings at the other city hall, was that whole area, we wanted it as commercial. That was the discussions with everyone present. So at this point, to change that back to institutional, we discussed these institutional properties back where the log cabin is and the synagogue is. I mean, all these things were going over and over and over. This is not something new. This is, and Tom was at those meetings.
And I never talked about that for Jerome Adams. As far as I'm concerned, it's discriminatory, and I think if we voted in that way, that we're opening ourselves up, because we're saying the only Catholic place we're gonna make commercial, but all the other places we're gonna make institutional government. It's wrong. I just think
It's
wrong.
consistent with what's there now.
It's not consistent, it's an institutional thing. Just because you think you can convert it into houses or condos, it's a church.
It's a church as long as they want it to be a church. Nobody's chasing that church out of there.
The other one's a hairdresser.
Right, it is commercial. It's always been commercial.
Again, maybe that's something that the board will wish to vote on separately from the rest of it, from the rest of the master plan, in terms of what it wants that piece to be.
From a builder standpoint, Jerome Avenue, the lots there are not gonna sell for a long time because they're just gonna stay stagnant. It's not economical for a guy to get involved. If we did commercial on the bottom, residential on top, on both sides of the street, with off-street parking in them, and came up with some kind of an idea for that, I think we'd clean up coming in town and see what you can do with something like that, because across the street's gonna come be at us probably within the next few months.
Across the street where, I'm
From the
sorry.
church, where Roberts was the hairdresser. Barrels is in there now.
Okay,
They're gonna be at us
across
in the
that
next
street.
few months, of, if not sooner, to do something. And we can't do anything with the empty lots across the street now.
I believe some of them are sold.
All three of them were sold, Tom.
No.
I was offered them
No.
last week.
I'm saying I think one or two of them are already sold now for homes. You can ask Joe about that.
All right.
And Stuart, I agree with you. Maybe we should make that a separate vote.
I'm all lost. Okay, just to be clear, what's the separate vote gonna be?
Whether that should be institutional or commercial, or church.
And Stuart's suggesting that it should be commercial?
Well, what we're suggesting is that, yes, that it be commercial. Can you pull up the map, the close-up of the map on the screen without losing your
Go from
place?
Institutional, but leave the
Right,
rest
and
of it
what is
commercial.
Tom
It
saying? It should
exists
stay
now.
institutional? So
It exists now.
it's residential. Okay, so we should.
Right. So,
Okay, so here is the church, right at the J.E. on Jerome. And it's currently zoned S60, current zoning. Proposed zoning is that we would take this area here and convert that into a C1. Okay?
Could you show Jerome Avenue on that is in the middle of the page?
Okay. It's right here, if everybody can see. Well, my suggestion was, since there seems to be some debate over the issue, is that if the board would, and this is all subject to your solicitor agreeing with this comment, this recommendation, is that whatever differences of opinion there may be, adopt the zoning map as proposed as a whole, but take separate votes on specific items where there may be disagreement.
Where would the institutional be on there? It would just be on the one side of Jerome?
Yeah, is that what you're talking about, Tom? It would just be on the
I
one
think
side,
it would be
just where the church is?
Just the one side.
right. I don't want to touch your screen, but right here.
Like half of that block.
And that becomes, the other issue is this map, I think, is a little old because my recollection is there's been some subdivision work.
Yes.
And please correct me if I'm wrong. So the extent of where this new zone would be is probably, I don't know, closer to the top of the M, roughly.
No, I think it's already adjusted.
Is that already adjusted?
It's right there, yeah.
This part here.
That's 30.
Right, yeah.
My mistake.
Right.
The 3 lots in the back is already an S30 zone.
Okay.
In the proposed, the development, all the plans are already in place. In the proposed, we would just shift that into the adjacent S25 zone to make it contiguous.
All right, well, before we go any further and have to do a formal vote, the board, we can have an open discussion here. Does anybody else feel this needs a separate vote?
I just wanted to add some comments, because
Well, right,
it's, I support.
this isn't a motion.
I support the purpose of your intent, that you want to make sure the church is preserved just like the other religious institutions. But my thought is, I wonder if it would benefit the church to have the zoning be commercial, because like it was mentioned, they're not going to be asked to leave. They can remain a church so long as they want, but then potentially in the future, they intend to sell the property. I don't know if they find a better location. And then they have that benefit of being in a commercial zone for them. I don't know if it becomes more desirable, I don't know. I'd like to see the church stay there as well, but I don't know what benefit the zoning has to the church.
Blessed Sacrament is a part of Margate. It's always been a part of Margate. No, there's no intention on anybody's part to chase them out.
I understand that, but Clem brought out another point that Blessed Sacrament and Margate Community Church are both excluded, and they're 2 out of the 3. Right, they should be institutional, those pieces of
But why
property.
should they be institutional?
Because they're they're doing it for the whole Jewish community, but not the Protestant.
Now, that's
Which is what this map is showing.
that's not,
But that's what it's
Out
showing.
of
No,
order,
no, it's
out of
actually
order.
not.
Tom, you're out of order.
No, I'm not.
Yes, I said you were, I'm the boss.
No, you're not. That's what it's showing to me. You're taking out one and putting the other 2 into different zones. They should all be institutional. That's what you said earlier on. That was
Said,
part
we're
of your
doing
consent.
institutional where it's contingent to institutional land. I would like to have some discussion right now to end this racist discussion. That, does board members, anyone else have an opinion? Anyone else feel like we need to take a vote on this? Okay. Okay.
I was just reminded that city fathers spoke to Father Joe as to what the future proposed zoning for the church would be, and he had no problem with it, for whatever that's worth. Again, I come back to, if you look at the city's current zoning map, do you have it here? And I hate to zone by pretty picture, that's really not the intent, but there's spot zoning all over this map. And it really is, from a planning standpoint, impermissible. And what we tried to do as we combed through the city's zoning map is to create some rationality in the zoning, both between zones and within zones. So for the same reason that this, as we propose, Ryan, can you hold up the other? This, we propose no longer to look like this. There are sections throughout the town that nobody's chasing anybody, but a rational zoning pattern should prevail. And that's one of the reasons why we chose to do, to recommend the special waterfront zoning. Again, to provide some rationality to your zone plan.
Tom, can I say something about
Yes.
Commercial versus, so I'm sure Blessed Sacrament will be there. But if they were, say they were to move, say Bethel were to go out, it's zoned institutional, and the church decided they liked that location because there's parking, okay? And you switched Blessed Sacrament to institutional. Okay, Blessed Sacrament moves to Bethel because there's parking there. So now you're left with a big piece of property that's zoned institutional, right? What else is gonna go there? If it's commercial, there's more options. What else would go there?
But the problem is, if you do it as institutional, then it's going to keep some rich developer from coming in trying to take it out from under the city. If you put it as commercial, they could do that. If it's institutional, they're not going to do that. You're going to keep the integrity of the community by not dangling carrots out saying, move to another city. There already is 3 churches that have combined to the one. And eventually, they're all going to be in Blessed Sacrament.
Right.
Because the other 2 are too small, okay? But if you give them the incentive and say, hey, we can make $10 million, so by doing it as institutional and doing Margate Community as institutional, it keeps consistency with the religious community, and it follows the precepts that they set forth earlier in the plan that we just saw. The goal was to promote that. That's what we just went through.
Okay.
So in continuing this discussion, we're going to have a vote now or not. So does anyone else have any comments, whether we should or should not have a vote?
I just have
I want to
another
hear your
question.
comments so we do or don't have to have a vote. So if you don't feel like you don't think we need to vote, I want you to say it.
What specifically would the vote be?
The vote would be whether that's turned commercial or whether that's turned institutional.
Margate Community and Blessed Sacrament is what Tom and I are saying.
Okay, let that be the vote.
What is the vote?
I think if there's a
Turn
vote,
Margate Community into institutional, turn Blessed Sacrament institutional. Get rid of that Parkway land there where. I'm not calling a vote. There's no support for it. You got 2 people. End of discussion.
I just,
Wait a second.
Well, Joe, wait a second. You had an opportunity. Now speak up or don't speak up.
I am, Mr. Chairman, I'm speaking now. And I believe that there's some validity to leaving both those as institutional.
We're not leaving them as institutional. They are currently
Then
residential.
Making them as institutional, period.
just in the effort to reach a compromise, I wonder, is there some possible zoning identifier that could be made for all of the religious institutions that mark them as commercial/institutional?
No.
That's.
You don't want commercial in the middle of the parkway.
More, yeah. That's making it more
The,
complicated.
the goal here was to create a zone around all of these lands that reflects the entirety of the area around it. That is why the area around Margate Community is zoned residential. The area around Blessed Sacrament would be proposed to be zoned commercial. And the area around the parkway, do we have the, or not the parkway, this is proposed? The area for where the Jewish Community Center and Bethel is also, with all due respect, Mr. Collins, reaches down to the city's athletic fields, all the way down to to Amherst Avenue, and reaches west to include the log cabin. So it's the institutional uses that are presently there that create a campus of institutional uses in that section of the city, just as the Parkway creates, it's probably the wrong term, but a campus of residential, of a specific type of residential uses, and the area around Blessed Sacrament would produce a campus of commercial uses, albeit one use in each of those zones isn't exactly like the other.
Could we possibly do the Jerome Avenue as a commercial? And just stay on Jerome Avenue and leave the Parkway?
That's what's proposed right now.
We're talking about doing right now. Yeah, yeah, that's what's proposed.
That's what's currently proposed in the plan that they're presenting.
frankly, you have an existing commercial property here
What?
at the entrance to the Parkway that's already commercial, that's zoned as 60. So we're proposing to just acknowledge that that is in fact a commercial property. And then the expansion over here, instead of just being the corner property, to adjacent properties. So again, this is what's proposed. And as we highlighted earlier, frankly, it was a lot more contiguous, at least in appearance, because this parcel was previously included prior to you receiving an application to convert it to residential. So again, not to prejudice you against that application, and because of the deed restriction that was discovered, this property could no longer be part of the C1. So again, this was a sort of commercial pocket that was the plan for what we had in our plan. So I think the elimination of that property from commercial makes this look a lot more fragmented, but this was a much more cohesive, contiguous commercial zone.
It was, but it's not now.
Well, again, that's a change as of a month ago. So.
Right, so that's why we're making these recommendations.
Brian, move on. Move on, we're not going to take a vote.
Fair enough. Move to Washington Avenue, which I believe we're up next. Beach. Okay, so Washington Avenue pedestrian corridor. This gets back to the C1 zone that we talked about, sort of the first one.
36.
Turn the TV back to.
Oh, yep. So, the purposes that we had was to enhance walkability between the beach and the bay, and to acknowledge the existing residential uses that are there. As you can see when we flip to the map real quick, the pink zone is the C1 zone. It's sort of broken up. It doesn't reach the waterfront. It doesn't reach the central business district on the other side. And it's a C1 and there's one commercial property in the entire zone. So it just didn't seem to make too much sense to us. So we wanted, the goal that we had was to connect the beach to the bay to the beach along Washington Avenue. And you don't need to do that with commercial development necessarily. So our recommendations is to permit residential or professional uses, and then provide for larger setbacks and enhanced treatments, enhanced landscaping, streetscape features, things that make it a little less visually daunting to look from the bay to the beach and a little more inviting to walk that area. You want to bring people from the bayfront to your central business district and then up to the beach from there. It's just to try to make a connection across the 5 blocks and make it seem shorter than it really is. So, and again, that's the proposed boundaries on this map.
Can we go back to that a minute?
What's that?
Can we talk about this a little more? So, are you saying that going down Washington Avenue, any future development, we're going to require to have commercial on the first floor?
Along Washington?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, okay, good.
No. Quite,
All right.
quite the opposite. We're acknowledging that if you look at the orange stretch as our proposed
Right.
zone, again, all of the properties except one are residential
Okay,
in that area.
right.
The previous zone was commercial, which is not appropriate when all of the uses are residential in the zone.
Right.
So what we're proposing is to say, okay, this is now a residential zone. You can have a professional office or something like that here, but this is not a retail zone. But what it does need to be is a walkable corridor. So if it's going to be a residential zone, it just needs to be a residential zone with larger setbacks and a little more landscaping requirements to make it a little more inviting and a little more pedestrian friendly.
Okay.
So that's the goal, and it's not the entire stretch of Washington. It's really just trying to get you from Monmouth up a little bit past Winchester. You're trying to connect the waterfront special district where you have your marinas and restaurants and whatnot to the central business district, and then the central business district connects down to the beach. So, ideally, you want the goals of Washington Avenue. You want it to be walkable the full length, but this zone would really only apply to this block and a half or so stretch.
Okay.
And then the last section is proposed zone, which primarily is the boutique hotel, condo hotel overlay that we had talked about, to provide some kind of transient housing option. You currently have none. Actually scoured to look for Airbnb and other alternatives like that, and even with that, there wasn't a ton of options. So the limits of this would be South Cedar Grove Avenue to South Monroe Avenue, from Atlantic to the beach. We realized that wasn't specified in the initial packet. But you can see that's what it would look like as an overlay. It's primarily over multifamily. It would also encompass a section of small business district that includes Venturas and Lucy's. So,
I thought we had discussed again at that meeting that back by the marinas where boaters come in that need places to stay. I thought that was going to be included. That wasn't,
Where's this map? Do we
I
have it?
recall, but
Do you not recall that?
okay, my mind's shot. There was discussion about people on boats have no place to stay when they come in within walking distance and, you know, back behind Blavitz or whatever. If that wasn't discussed, it wasn't. I thought it wasn't, maybe it wasn't.
that wasn't my understanding. I mean, I
Okay.
can tell you just
We
from.
did
Okay.
discuss that at the meeting, but we never came to any firm decision as to what was gonna be done there.
Well, I can tell you just from personal family boating experience, my parents took a sailboat down to the Bahamas twice. Most of the time, people who are going and need a place to stay on a boat usually stay on their boat. And people who are going to go somewhere on their boat usually are going for the day. They're going to a restaurant, a destination.
Okay,
We feel like the
fine.
waterfront special district is that. So you do need transient slips, but they're sort of part-time. Maybe that's what we were, maybe that's what the mix-up was, but.
Okay, so I got a question. With all these colors, so where's the hotel?
Doesn't-
What color is the hotel? Contel, Dotel, or whatever
But
it is?
it's that area with the cross red hatching. It would be an
That's it?
overlay on top of, well, you would want it to be essentially right along the beach area. There you go.
Why? I mean, I kind of agree with the chairman. I mean, I
I wasn't
think,
proposing anything. I was just
Oh.
asking a question, please.
no, all right, so,
The idea was to bracket this overlay zone with the existing high-rises.
Right.
right. But, you know, there's one parcel in particular that I always think of off of Washington Avenue where they have that old hotel now, where Hawk lives, you know what I'm talking where the guy got killed about 10 years ago. Yeah, yeah. So, you know, I kind of always thought that would be a good place for a hotel because, you know, it would service all those restaurants and bars down in that area. You follow me?
Well, and you know what, it may be that particular lot may be an excellent place for a hotel, but if we were to zone it as that, it would be spot zoning that property. So I think that's kind of, there are a handful of properties probably where if somebody wanted to do something there, given especially what's around it, maybe that's a good reason for somebody to come in and ask for a variance where they have to notify everybody around the property so they're not disrupting a neighborhood.
Just to be clear, you're not allowed to spot zone. That's why we keep bringing it
Right,
up.
right, okay, so, just because for some reason I don't have that here, what the overlay, what does that encompass?
It stretches from Monroe to Cedar Grove, Atlantic to the beach. So it's
Okay,
5, 6, approximately 6 full
Okay.
and 1/2 block, right?
So,
It's in the area of existing high-rises, so that's.
And the reason the reason we're recommending it as an overlay is that the existing zoning remains. So nobody who's there now gets hurt. Their
Right.
zoning doesn't change. This is an overlay, a conditional use overlay that basically says, if you're going to do a hotel that is, and we haven't crafted, part of the ordinance would be to craft the requirements, but presumably, if you're going to be, you know, a mid-rise hotel and you're going to go up to roughly the height of one of the existing taller buildings there, and you would need to have parking underneath, and you would need, I'm making all this up, I don't know what it's going to say, and you would need to have, a restaurant that's open to the public in there, and you'd need to have certain amenities that a normal hotel would have, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you meet all of these, then you get to build on this land. But if you're an existing use there, or if you want to come in and create something along the lines of the base zoning, and you don't want to take advantage of all of these requirements, you can do that too. So we didn't change the whole zone, we created an option for that zone, an overlay option for that zone.
Okay.
Could you tell me where in the plan it discusses this overlay and any like,
It does, we do touch on the hotel motel potential zone. There's only about a paragraph or so again. I sort of led in with, for whatever reason, the version that got printed out did not include the location. That's why I said at the beginning that the limits of this were not described in that, unfortunately. So that hopefully this is.
just that paragraph though? Do you know what page it's on, just so I can refer to it?
It's at the tail end of the recommendation section. It would be the very end of the land use section.
Page is 60, so you might start from there.
59.
It's on 59?
Sure, do I understand correctly, you're proposing that there could be a 7-block long wall of high-rise buildings?
Well, that's a very good question, and let's be clear about this. First of all, the zone would permit, call it mid-rise, vertical development anywhere where they're attached, okay? That would have to be subject to the CAFRA requirements. CAFRA has view corridor requirements both in terms of, and I hope y'all can hear me without it, both in terms of step backs from the beach as well as view corridor requirements along the side streets. So the CAFRA requirements are very prescriptive about how dense development can be, or in the
buildings that are
alternative.
there could not be rebuilt.
Pardon me?
The buildings that are there could never be rebuilt. They
I would
would
agree
not-
with that.
They would not meet CAFRA requirements. They would have to be set back to Winchester Avenue
Yeah,
to get that size.
I would agree with that. But part of what CAFRA regulates is view corridor, shadow, height. So while we, from an economic development standpoint, would recommend that the city be as expansive and permissive to allow the most creativity for a developer and for a talented architect to come in, at the end of the day, CAFRA is going to regulate what can go there. So a concern of a wall of high-rise development, an uncut wall of high-rise development, I think, while I understand it, I don't think it would happen. Not that I don't think it. It would never happen. CAFRA would never permit it.
Don't we have that now? We have high rises there now.
They all predated.
Right, but if they were to tear one down and put a hotel up, it'd be still in that same area.
It would. So what we're saying is, from Margate's regulations, let's allow the most creativity as possible. Let's allow the biggest envelope and the most opportunity for somebody to create something that's really phenomenal, with the understanding that the bad guy is going to sit in Trenton and he's going to pinch them back. So between the two, the thought is you're going to get something that will work from an environmentalist standpoint and work from an economic development standpoint.
And it's not purely residential either, it's a condo hotel, so there's certain restrictions that you're not gonna have the out-of-town builder come in there and just put up a big wall of residential units. It's not gonna happen.
That's correct. And I will tell you, I had a similar conversation a number of years ago when I did a master plan in North Wildwood. And back then, the economy was a little different, and people were coming in and doing condo after condo after condo. And the regulations that we proposed, the city didn't want any more condos. They wanted hotel rooms. And the regulations that we proposed were really definitive about what type of facility you were going to have, and it wasn't going to be an overwhelmingly residential facility. We went through months and months of crafting regulations that we would offer up to Margate as for consideration. But the idea was, we don't want condos. We want true hotels. Now, of course, the economy did what the economy did, and nothing got built at all. But we would bring that experience and those kind of suggestions here to make sure that the city is protected. And again, that's a box. That's a one-dimensional box looking down saying this is where it would be permitted. Once we get into the design regulations, I don't think the city wants property line to property line development. They want something that looks good. So combining the city's development regulations with the CAFA regulations, with an architect who's going to provide his expertise, we think we can provide a set of recommendations or a set of regulations that is going to be acceptable to everybody.
Just on the overlay issue, I don't think that the city, and personally, I know I'm not worried about being the bad guy, and let's put it in our master plan and get it sent up to Trenton and let them kick it and veto it back. I think that when we're doing our master plan, we should be upfront about what we want for the future of the city. I think that the design regulations are very important, especially with this issue, because if you leave that door open, it can be interpreted that maybe we do want that wall, and I personally don't want to see that. I think that you, in this issue, have to be clear that you want to limit it. You don't want them lined up to line up. You have to be clear, especially in
You're
this
absolutely
area.
right, and I didn't mean to suggest that. What I meant to suggest was that let the city's regulations permit the development community to be as creative as possible. And maybe and when you look, believe me, when you look at the CAFA regulations, you begin to roll your eyes as to how ridiculous sometimes they can be. So let us, within reason, press against the CAFA regulations. They're going to press back, but let us not accept them out of whole cloth because we won't get any development whatsoever.
Just by way of recommendation, I would recommend to the other board members, and if possible, that we add additional language to this section because it's such a significant section for the city and has the opportunity to really change
No
the
problem.
footprint of the city. I think it needs to be just more direct as to what we want and what we don't want. Even if it's not something that I agree with.
We'd be
I
happy
don't-
to, no, you're absolutely
I
right.
particularly don't like the mid-rise. That's me. But if the board supports it, then put that in. If don't hide it. I think we should be very clear about what we're suggesting in those paragraphs.
Understood, absolutely.
So,
Any other further questions, anything? All right. Some nice, fun, noteworthy, and fun controversial stuff. Beach block parking. Our recommendation is to permit beach block parking on one side of the street and alternate each year. You'll find that in section 6.2C. The other plan that we had was we came across a one-way street plan that we had prepared in 2003 or 4. And looking at that and looking at some of the goals for some of the other travel plans that have been conducted recently, it seemed to make sense to have an objective to create a more consistent and alternating one-way street pattern in the city. It just gives you a better, clearer circulation pattern in the city, and it gives you additional parking opportunities to park on both sides of the street. On a street that used to be two-way with only parking on one side, now you can have one-way traffic and parking on both sides. And, as in any city, if you have alternating one-way streets, it becomes very clear to people, where currently you have sort of broken up pockets of one-way streets where you're not sure which section you're in. So we're just trying to clarify that. And we were told to keep it to an hour. We're an hour and 50 minutes, so we're done. Unless you have any questions, comments, anything else.
Again, we have the rest of our team here who is prepared to answer questions on any aspect of the document you have in front of you. We try to, as Ryan said, keep it as concise as possible, but we are available to answer any questions.
Just as a point of order for the recommendations that she made, for expediency, we can leave it as it is tonight, and that wording, we can pass it tonight, and we can always make a change to that at a later time.
I would defer to your solicitor at that if
That's
you want
where
to.
I got the information from.
Well, then, there you go.
Can I clarify the C2 zone on the north end? So, one, I just want to verify that all the commercial zones you're recommending remain no residential first floor, whether it's C1, C2.
Yes.
Okay, so no residential first floor in any commercial zone. I don't understand why C2 in the north end, why your emphasis on professional, medical, or institutional and not retail permitted.
Okay, so you're talking about.
Yeah, the north end.
South end?
South
North-
end.
Actually, the
North-
south,
oh.
it's the Longport side.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
South end.
Right, so
Oh, sorry,
along Ventnor
sorry.
Avenue. Yeah, so that area is the sort of the transition.
Yeah, south end.
From Longport into your central business district. The surrounding areas are residential. The current uses are doctor's offices and real estate. There is no ground floor retail there. All of the ground floor retail starts at Jefferson. So in order to not try to recraft that whole area, we felt that was just more appropriate. You're getting away from the central business district outside of the core area. So that area should be transitional, so not retail, but still commercial in some way.
And for at least the immediate time frame, we wanted to make sure that the commercial was concentrated so it can build on itself and it could be mutually supportive. If at some time it looks like the more retail-oriented commercial wants to migrate itself south, either you could grant a variance, and I'm going to guess this board would be open to granting a variance such as that, or we could come back and revisit that zone if it looks like there's some demand there to moderate it.
I'm just saying, you may not have medical or that all the time down that end. Another real estate office, Just saying, if we want retail, then we could look at that.
Retail would require a variance, you're saying?
As proposed, retail would require a variance.
Right, we tried to sort of compact and come up with more defendable boundaries to say, this is your retail core. We
Right.
really want our retail businesses concentrated in the central business district so that people making trips are stopping at all of the retail stores
understand.
and supporting,
So if I'm a retail guy coming in, the city is driving me.
Right, you want continuity within the.
Exactly.
I understand that. Okay,
Exactly.
thank you.
So, again, getting back to the central business district, page 34, you have something that says, additional height for a full or nearly full residential third floor should be considered in this area. So, if we pass this tonight, do we still have to?
In terms of process,
Right.
the master plan is an outline, okay? The
Okay.
master plan is, this is what we want to see. We still have to, after the master plan gets developed, take a run through your zoning code, your development ordinance, and make the changes that are recommended here, okay? Now, in terms of process, what we would do is, we would have a draft zoning code. We would bring it back to this board for a ruling of consistency with the master plan, and then it goes to the governing body to be adopted by ordinance.
Okay.
And as always, the devil being in the details, here we're looking at broad recommendations. The ordinance would be chapter and verse, this is what it is, and this is the height, and this is the length, and
Okay, good.
blah, blah.
So Mark comes in.
Can I make a motion? Chairman?
Is there any more discussion, any comments?
Nope.
If not, do we have to get public comment?
Yes.
Is there anyone from the public that would like to comment? Public portion is closed. Stan, would you read the motion?
Yes, just to clarify, and Mr. Weiser, they did a great job in presenting it. We make changes to the zoning ordinance a lot. I think right now, though, like as Mr. Weiser said, it's a outline of what we're trying to do. It doesn't mean that we're it's set in stone. If there's some things that need to be changed, it's an evolving, there's evolving changes made to zoning and planning. This is just essentially trying to update our master plan because it's a required document for every municipality to show what happened since the last master plan, to show certain changes that we might need in the future. But it doesn't mean that because this planning board is passing this master plan or not passing it, but let's say if it passes and votes yes to adopt this plan as it's written right now, that doesn't mean it's set in stone that we can't change things. Okay, so it's not as if we're the planning board's making the ordinance changes. That can't be done by the planning board. That has to be done by the governing body. All the planning board is doing is making certain recommendations to the development code. So I don't want anyone to be confused that when we vote tonight for this, that all those changes are absolutely being made. They're just being recommended to the governing body essentially in one larger plan right now. So.
But let me add one more piece
Sure.
to that, and that is, this is your document. This is the planning board's document. This is the vision that the planning board has for the city of Margate. So what that means is, regardless of, at some point, the zoning ordinance will be changed. It'll come back. You'll find it consistent with the master plan. The governing body will adopt it. You need to have this done before we can get into the details of the ordinance. But most importantly, I think for a land use board, is that when somebody comes to you and requests a variance, this is the document that you judge variances against. So if somebody comes in and wants to put a smelting plant on North Douglas Avenue, you say, well, it's not in our master plan. You got to prove to us, and as a land use board, for the negative criteria, an applicant has to prove that it's not injurious to the master plan, and it's not injurious to the development ordinance, and it's not injurious to the greater good. So this becomes that first level check against somebody coming in and wanting to do something that may not be the vision of the town. Or check that, may not be the vision of this board, because this is wholly your document.
I have one more thing. Mark, I have a question for you. Back in 2004, the building heights were allowed to go up, and there was uproar throughout the community, and it was redone in 2006, and building heights were lowered, the third floors were made half of the size of second floors. And I've asked you this question through Brian, but I'm not sure if it got to you. We're proposing that the heights go to 30 feet, but that the outside walls do not change. In other words, if they want to go higher, pardon me?
Eaves.
Yes.
Well, you tell them what I'm saying.
The pitch.
I'm not a contractor, so he
He's saying from the ridge at the one height, then the eave is another. So we're dropping the eave down, so we're increasing the 5 feet. We'd be increasing the 5 feet property slope. So we're bringing the eave down so it wouldn't look so nasty.
we didn't want to go against, there was, the 2006 meeting probably had 200 people there screaming. We don't want to go against what happened before, and if a house goes up by 2 feet, the whole massively doesn't go up. If it goes up by 2 feet, the roof could go up by 2
Okay.
feet. The pitch would be higher. My question to you, which you probably never got, was is there a way we can quantify that? Because depending on the width of the house, we can't say it has to be such and such roof pitch. We want something to say the top of the walls or the eave or whatever doesn't go up. Only the
Right.
center point of the roof can go up with an additional pitch, which would not make the house any more massive. The additional roof pitch would make it more attractive, but they would have a little more headroom on that half-third floor that they have.
Yes, I understand that, and Mr. Cristaldi, that is how you govern it, is you set the maximum eave height of the roof, so where the roof
Perfect.
springs from.
That's the answer I've been
And
looking
that's
for months, so
Basically
that's
how
good.
Longport does it,
Okay,
That does that in Wallingford.
okay.
yes.
So that's how we can word it to
Yes.
keep the, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
For the record, that did get to him, and that was what he told us, so.
He's just shrugged his shoulders, so I thought it didn't.
But just in terms of roof height, and I think Ryan touched on this, with respect to the conversation about the Marvin Gardens area, is that you've got roof height in terms of what you just talked about, but you also have building height based on the new elevations that are going to come out from FEMA. So these are all things that have to go into the conversation. And I will tell you, frankly, Margate's going to look a little different. And it's, you know, you can blame Hurricane Sandy or Superstorm Sandy, but the requirements that are coming out of the federal government and requirements for flood insurance and minimum floor elevations, shore towns are changing. And we may not all like that, but that's frankly a fact of life.
Stan, I have one more question for you.
Sure.
On our vote, is it a yes or no, or do we need a basis of our vote?
It's a yes or no.
Okay, if there's no more discussion, then Stan.
It would be a motion to adopt a 2016 Comprehensive Master Plan update presented tonight and prepared by Remington and Burdick. With the changes as discussed to be made, there's certain modifications that need to be made that Mr. Weiser, excuse me, testified to. There are certain parts of it that aren't complete. So that's just going to be updated, but it was already discussed tonight what those updates were going to be.
And the chairman will,
Yes.
if they're if the updates are in line with what the discussion was, they'll feather into the document. To the extent there's anything that might be different, we bring it back, but we don't expect that to happen.
Okay. Okay, but those additions, as what Mr. Weiser said, would also be part of the motion.
I'll make the motion.
A second.
Who's second?
It's going to be nine votes, John.
Tom Collins,
Yes.
Clem Wozleski,
Yes on the motion.
Mike Cristaldi,
Yes on the motion.
Margaret Gubernalty,
Yes.
Jim Galantino.
Yes.
Mike Richmond,
Yes.
Craig Palmisano,
Yes.
David Carter. Rich Patterson.
Yes.
The application passes, or the master plan passes, to be forwarded to the commissioners, a vote of 9-0.
Thank you all very much. We really did enjoy working on this project.
Thank you. I
Thank you,
think you
Stu.
did a great job.
Thank you.
We're going to take a 5 or 10 minute break. Clear at the last meeting, and we advertised for this night. So that will be carried till at least April.
Can you say
If there's
that
still time
again?
for notification. Say which again? The applicant did not show up. The meeting was notified for tonight. It was very clear at the last meeting that they could not fit on the March schedule, so we were bending over backwards and letting them come in at this meeting. Apparently, there was some misunderstanding on the other end. They can't fit in the March meeting. There hasn't been time to notice, so they will have to re-notify for the April meeting if Roger McLaurin,
If available.
if available. Yeah, so they'll have to contact Mr. McLaurin.
Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to close the meeting.
All in favor?
Hey, Remy.
All opposed?
Ralph.